morning to our participants. It's really lovely to see that you are all coming through and joining us again. I know that there's a lot of names that are in the participant list that I do recognise. Obviously, again, a lot of names that I don't. So I just want to give you all a quick introduction to this morning's session for our newbies. My name is Andrea Davis. I am the Programme Manager at the Civil Service College. And I will be with you for 1 hour, and I am joined by our two speakers this morning, Rob Baker, who is the founder and chief positive deviant of Tailored Thinking, author of Personalisation at Work and TEDx speaker, and executive lecturer at Newcastle University. And I'm also joined by Perry Timms, who is the founder and chief energy officer at PTHR and HR Most Influential Thinker 2017 to 2019. Author of Transformational HR and the Energised Workplace, also a TEDx speaker as well, and adjunct professor, visiting fellow, and LinkedIn learning instructor and accredited geothologist. So we do have our two speakers who are going to be delivering this morning's session on the nature of hybrid working, optimising wellbeing, energy and the environment. I just want to go through a quick housekeeping rules. Everyone must keep their microphones off at all times because it's quite off-putting if our speakers are trying to deliver the session and we can hear background noise. So please do keep your speakers off and your cameras as well. So please do remember to do that. The session will be recorded, so you will receive a recording after the session has finished, probably in the next couple of days, and you will receive a copy of the slides as well. We want to promote maximum participation. We want engagement from you all. We want lots of questions. So please do use the chat box. If you do have any questions for Rob, if you do have any questions for Perry, we want you to share your experiences. We want you to raise comments. We want you to challenge Rob and Perry if you need to. This is part of Mental Health Awareness Week, of course, and I know that this resonates to a lot of our participants at the moment, especially through lockdown and the pandemic. And of course, working from home, working in the office and the environment that you're in. So I hope this does resonate a lot with you and you can take some takeaways with you this morning. We are working in collaboration with Kogan Page authors today. So this is a joint collaborative session with Civil Service College and Kogan Page. Again, if you've got any questions, please use the chat box. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Perry.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's great to see so many of you here, and a topical thing I think for Mental Health Awareness Week that we're talking about, I guess, hybrid working and wellbeing, energy and the environment and everything in between all of that. So I'll sort of move the slides on to remind us just a little bit about what we're going to cover today, and I think it is all about this emergence. So May the 17th is touted as the day we can all hug again sensibly, and that lots of establishments are reopening, and the feeling of movement, I think, is coming back to us. But of course, that brings with it all sorts of challenges and uncertainties, as we've been in this lockdown adapted situation for quite some time. So we're going to talk about the how, where and what we feel about work, really. And Rob and I have got some distinct but related kind of perspectives on it. So we're going to look at hybrid working, and I'm going to take you through a little bit of a journey through that. Rob's going to talk to you about the fascinating concept of job crafting, where I think we are now starting to think a little bit more about, well, what have we learned during this pandemic and what's it done to the nature and the focal points of our work. And we'll both cover things like energy. And so we're both intensely sort of eyes and ears tuned to what the world's talking about. It's very difficult to keep up with it in some respects, but we're going to try and help you galvanise into some sense of what your next stage design is for work, both in what people do, where they do it, how they do it. So we are adamant that it's not back to normal, and we're adamant it's not even a new normal, but it is an evolution. So we're looking at what fits humans in the 21st century. A little bit about Rob. Rob, do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about tailored thinking?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the opportunity. So Tailored Thinking are a positive psychology, wellbeing and HR consultancy, which we strive to make work better and to make better work using the application of positive psychology, behaviour science, and wellbeing research as well. And we were fortunate enough last year to be named the HR Consultancy of the Year by the CIPD, which was an amazing honour for a kind of a new young company such as ourselves. So it's a real delight to be here today and to be pairing with you, Perry, and talking to everyone.
Thanks, Rob. And you'll be very modest about your winning, but as a judge of CIPD awards, not your category, Rob, I hasten to add, I know how tough actually it is to evidence and prove to the judges that you deserve it. So well done there. And a plug for your book, Personalisation at Work, which is shortlisted in the same category as my book. So we're up against each other, but I'm willing you on, Rob. So a little bit about me and the company that I have set up since 2012. Before I do that, though, I've got 21 years as a civil servant. I worked in what's now the Ministry of Justice for 21 years, taught me a lot, helped me a lot, and I've still got some active clients in the local and central government sectors. So yeah, what we stand for is better business for a better world. So the common theme there between Rob and I is that better. The work we do is largely with HR, change and leadership teams that we're looking at transforming how people work in order to get them to a state of flourishing. That's what we really aim for. We're a pending B Corporation certified organisation. If you don't know anything about that, that's where you stand more for company, community, the planet and so on. We're also a gold status 4-day week employer. Now, today shouldn't be a day that I'm on duty because Wednesday is a day that we don't work as an organisation, but we have a mantra that we work on Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays and Fridays, and in between that, the Wednesday, we do whatever's good for our soul, and I thought this would be pretty good for my soul. We're also a living wage accredited employer, and as I said, I'm in the same category as Rob for Business Book of the Year with a book called The Energised Workplace, and that's the final plug. So I'm going to kick us off, and then Rob's going to sort of take you through the journey of job crafting. But I mean, this is just a grab of quite literally what's being talked about, shared and declared, I suppose, in the concept of returning to work. I don't even like the phrase because there's a degree of the population that have been unable to work and so have taken advantage of the furlough construct. But to a lot of us, we've just continued working in a very static way. We've been working from home, so we haven't stopped working. And in fact, I think, you know, in the Mental Health Awareness Week spirit, a lot of us have found our day has kind of expanded, and we're putting in a shift that looks more like a 12-14 hour constant screen time thing. And lots of people, as it says in the top right, they're tired. There's no break, there's no punctuation. It's very difficult to get stimulation when it's just you and a screen. So that's one anxiety we've got to grapple with. Now we've got organisations creating some quite polarising stances on it. Goldman Sachs, everybody back. PwC, work when you like. And so we've got this whole sense of, I guess, a real lack of clarity about what we mean by the place of work and where it sits in amongst all the other things we have to grapple with about the work that we do, particularly if we're a knowledge worker. Of course, if you work in care, hospitality, manufacturing, logistics, you've got to be at a place. Those people have kept the world moving since, so obviously the respect to key workers is part of this. But one of the things I would like to mention, because it's Mental Health Awareness Week, is this concept called FORTO, F-O-R-T-O. It's the fear of returning to the office. It's a legitimate thing. There are lots of people who are like, I don't know whether I want to go back. I'm not sure I feel safe still in close proximity with lots of people. And actually, a lot of people have said, I've rewired my life and my working habits. I don't need to be in a place to get my work done, because when I think about it, I endured a pretty awful commute. I got to a place. Once I signed in and plugged into the connected systems there, I put my headphones in because I wanted to get work done and not be distracted. So I think we've got this tension that some people prefer to do work that's much more deep and immersive, and others prefer to do more socialised and collaborative type stuff. So where do you go with this? It's an incredibly confusing agenda because there is no one way. There is no kind of magic dust that settles people's tensions and thoughts really about what they want to do. And I think if we ask people as well as leaders, I'm not sure they know exactly what the perfect rhythm is yet. We've got to do, I think, a lot of experimentation. And I think it requires an incredibly joint effort rather than declarations of either in or out or some mix of the two. So this is the state we're in. So I think it's really important, particularly for our mental health, that we know we are in this in-between state. There's a liminality to where we are now. For a start, not many of us have managed and lived through a pandemic response. And for a start, not many of us have had to make the adjustment like we did a year ago, an almost complete handbrake stop, where we've had to really challenge ourselves to use digital connectivity and all sorts of other imaginative ways to work. And that actually is an easier proposition than this liminal state of uncertainty and indecisiveness and unsure pathways. So I think it's important we know this. We are in an intermediate state. We are not sure about what the best options are as we re-emerge from a state of lockdown. And I think it's important to us that we give people space and time and thinking in order to make sense of what that liminality really is all about and work through it into a sense of certainty as much as we can. Now, I'm showing a sort of a historical context here to the construct of work. So it's not everything about work, but it starts to talk about two factors that I think we need to take account of when we're thinking about work post-pandemic. You've got the stratification of work, the structure, the flow, the processes, but then you've also got the kind of psychology and sociology of work. So we've got these two competing but also complementary factors of how we feel and how we behave and what we do and the processes, systems and tools that we use for that. So I'm not going to unpack this entire journey, but let's just say that through the last sort of 150 years, we've seen lots of tinkering and additions and schematics and methodologies. But we're now hitting a point post 2020 where it is almost like we've probably got to do some kind of hard reset. What systems do we use? What technology do we use? What social factors are important to us? What's the psychology of meaning and purpose for people in their work? So yeah, there's all sorts of reference points. And part of the reason for putting this diagram up is to say that you might have to go back in order to go forward. You might have to look at some of the pioneering stuff from 50 plus years ago that might help you understand how to recalibrate your working proposition. So yeah, there's a lot out there, and it's how you kind of assemble and build and creatively apply some of that to your context and your organization. You'll get a copy of these slides from Andrea afterwards, so don't worry if you haven't had time to screen grab this or make notes, but you'll get it anyway. Now, the important thing I think we need to start with is where are we? And I don't mean physically as in the proximity of a seat in a house or in an office, but where are we kind of psychologically and sociologically? This framework, if you're from Wales, you'll probably know the word Cynefin. It's loosely translated to habitat, but it kind of means where you are, where you're existing, where your thoughts are, where your frame of reference is. And this is a framework that was developed in the early 2000s as social technologies were starting to rewire how we connect and what we do with information and work. And so Dave Snowden and others constructed this framework quite deliberately to help us understand the place we are and what we need to do in that place. So if I start in the bottom left corner, we were in a chaotic state when March 2020 ticked over and the government said, right, that's it, work from home if you can, furlough if you can't. Most of us had been like, what's furlough? It was a completely new concept and term. And so quickly systems had to be produced, but we had to act before we could even really make sense of it. And it was only after we'd acted could we then start to make sense and then formulate perhaps tidier, smarter and more consistent responses. So this is almost like emergency states where you can't and you haven't got the time to think and plan. You've just got to do stuff. Now, it's quite hard on the psychology. It's quite disconcerting for people. But the opposite of that, of not doing anything, is even more perhaps of an anxiety creator. But as we started to get used to the dispersed workforce, we kind of moved from chaotic, and you could see that it started to just get more complex. How do I connect with my team? How do I understand what my leader wants from me? How do I understand people are engaged and motivated and feel supported, and they've got to do homeschooling and all sorts of things? So it became complex because we'd not done this before. There were lots of things we didn't know that we needed to know. So we had to probe, we had to experiment, we had to reveal, we had to then get a sense of what we found, and then we could formulate our responses, create a rhythm, build a system, and put a schedule together. So we're in the space of kind of unpredictability in these two parts of this model. And you can then see that again, as we started to establish rituals, we started to understand what worked and what didn't, we probably flipped over into complicated. We now knew what we didn't know. And so we could sense what we needed to do. We could perhaps analyse by getting some information, having some conversations and exchanges, and then we could respond to it. So you've gone from a state of unpredictability to trying to be more predictable and replicable, and therefore establish cadence, rhythm and certainty. And then blissfully, we probably ended up in the bottom category of clear, where it's all about best practice. We realised that actually 4 hours on Zoom is a killer. So therefore we stopped and we created punctuations and we did asynchronous video recording, and we just established a whole new sense of what work is and how we do it. Now we're emerging back into a bit of chaos because there's some stuff we don't know. This fear of returning to the office is actually something that now we're faced with it. We're probably thinking, I'm not sure I want it, or people going, I absolutely want it, but what if my team don't and I'm the only one? Lots of unknowable unknowns are with us at the moment. So Cynefin's a great way of saying, where are we with a situation and a problem, to help you diagnose, I think, what you need to do and how you need to respond. Because this is the kind of schematic we're working with now. We used to have the headquarters or perhaps satellite offices, but now we've got things like project offices, third spaces, co-working, socialized environments, working from home, how we meet and what we do. This is now perhaps a more complex route than it was before, because you had either home workers if they could do knowledge work, and then you had people who needed machinery and attention to people who were in the workplace. Now it's much more complicated about choice and rhythm and availability and what work gets done best where. We're still, I think, experimenting with that. But I wanted to give you a little sense of how we can triangulate this. So we start thinking about a hybrid organisation. It's kind of hybrid working perhaps, and I think what we've got to tune into is how people feel about their work and why they do it. So their sort of sense of meaning and purpose and connection and fulfilment. So that links to your people and culture side. And then we think about the process and the tech that helps us do that, and then we also have to triangulate that with the best place. So that's almost like as simple as we could ever get it. And that comes from a guy called Neil Usher, who's got over 25 years in workplace design. So he kind of knows what he's talking about, but he doesn't obsess about soft furnishings and collaborative areas. He said, why are we here? How do we do what we do? What kit do we need? And then let's work out the best place. This is how it used to be. Traditional, synchronous, office-based connection, working in that kind of scenario to the left screen. And we had some exceptions where we were distributed: sales representatives, client representatives, people who could and liked to work from home to do something deep and sort of thoughtful. But generally, the dial was shifted towards this traditional synchronous way of working. But there's really a third dimension to this when we're emerging, because it isn't as simple as whether you're in or out. And so I've tried to illustrate on this slide a few things to think about of the essence of what you would do in a traditional sense of a place-based, proximity-led working versus a remote and distributed concept. Because the hybrid actual sort of concept really doesn't sit in between that. It's a different space, because I think we think differently, knowing that we've got an opportunity to recast quite a lot of this in or out slider. We've got a third dimension to perhaps be a bit more creative, artistic and human towards it, and thinking about things like mental health, preferences, caring, exercise, all of those things. Do we really want to pile onto metal tubes and travel on tracks, or do we really want to mix that up so that that becomes a nice novelty rather than a habitual necessity? So I think there's lots in here we can think about, the processes, but also the psychology and how people feel about this. So I want us to think that hybrid isn't just an in or out, it's a third dimension. It requires us to recast some of the working frames, largely built around what's good for people in order for them to experience a good situation with their work and feel satisfied and more comforted by mental stimulus and I guess as much calm as we can bring to what's been a chaotic situation. And my advice is that it's about teams. I think that's the unit of change for this. So Goldman Sachs can declare everybody in if they want to as an organisational level. But if I work there, I'd rather talk to my team and go, what's best for us? Because we have a mixture of collaborative, socialised, creative work where we need to be together to help ourselves get great outcomes. But also I do a ton of analytics, I do lots of research, and I'd rather be in a quiet space on my own, deeply immersed in that work, but I don't want to disadvantage the team by just insisting that's all I do. I think that's how we get this right. It's almost like a patchwork rather than a simple blanket edict, or lots and lots of potentially volatile, individualized situations that may not pull together. So it kind of looks like this. You've got, instead of an exception for distributed work, it's largely distributed, but it's also got a feel of that synchronous stuff. So a team, in this case Alpha, have determined their best days for in the office are actually Monday and Friday. They start the week and they tail the week, and in between they'll work in a dispersed way, third space, working from home, whatever suits them. But as a team, that's what they pick. So they know when they're in a place how to get the best quality interactive experience when they're together, and then the asynchronous deeper work in the midst of all that. And then they happen to work closely with Team Beta, who have a different rhythm. They say, no, we want to do 3 days off the grid and 2 days on the commute, so that we come in and we work at the end of the week, because that suits them both personally and so on. Now, if you're Team Alpha and Team Beta and you need to work together, you both know that Fridays is your optimum day to do that, because you know and have declared that that's when the team are committing to be together in a proximity-based context. So none of this, let's have one person on a screen and 3 in a room. It's almost like you recast how you make decisions and what you do based on physical or digital proximity. And I think that's important for our mental health and connection to the work that we do. Some of the principles that help you: there's a concept of working out loud so everybody can see what work's being done. That's really healthy, rather than it being stacked in your inbox and nobody knows what you're up to. Deep and thoughtful work can be then sort of channeled in a particular way, so people can declare, look, I've got something really important that I need to really focus on, so I'm going to block out my calendar, I'm not going to answer calls, and I'm going to deeply immerse myself in that work. And everything else you can work on kind of iterative, sprint-based, punctuated work, so people feel a sense of completion and a sense of smaller successes that kind of build up. So it's like the marginal gains concept rather than monotonous, never finished work. And do lots more of our showing of work, so that we can share with people, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm doing, here's my prototype. And I think this brings people into a much more social context, whether that's in the office or virtually. Harvard Business Review have even published articles on this very topic, about sizing your work, about knowing what you're up against, whether you're in the office or not. And I don't think many places are very good at this. We just have a big work stack and plough through it. If you look at technologists, though, they very intricately measure the hours and effort and complexity and weight of work and know what they're doing to build a software program. I think we need to adopt a lot more of that for non-software work. So yeah, just a reminder really that this hybrid concept is a third space. It's not a in or out. It's more complex than that. And I think we need to give people some help, some choice and some flexibility about making that choice, so that that doesn't become an anxiety and a torture in amongst all of the other uncertainties. But we build it together. We collaboratively create this kind of next step. So I'm not a fan of blanket edicts, and I'm not a fan of absolutely individual rota-based scheduling and so on. More bureaucracy, more chaos. Let's get something as clear and as clean as we can. A little bit about us. So we run some online labs that help people do that, but I'm not just going to plug that. And there's the team there. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and give over to Rob, who will take you through the rest of the journey through some job crafting. So thanks everybody, and thanks Rob.
Perry, we actually had a couple of questions whilst Rob is setting up. So a gentleman named Chris has asked, referring to 3P's model for work, where does time fit into the model?
Where does time? Well, that's part of your process. It's also part of your culture. So your culture might determine that you operate in a particular kind of rhythm and cadence, I suppose. Time might impact on place, but I think time comes into part of your processes, how you value time, how you apportion time, and so on. That's where I put it. Okay.
Yeah. And another question from Louise: why should a mix of on-site and virtual meetings be avoided?
Why should it mix? Right, because I think what happens is if you've got more people in the room than on screen, then you get the little clique in the room and the person on screen feels very disadvantaged and very excluded. If you've got more people on screen and a few people in a room, you again almost get a different dynamic, because there's little side conversations going on in the room and people on the screens are going, what's going on there? I've seen it and I've experienced it. Google have got a great concept where they're making circular meeting kind of dens with massive screens, so people are quite literally virtually present. That's the nearest I could get to mix and match. If you have to do it, but I'd avoid it if you can, and particularly on crucial, complex and quite challenging meetings, they're either best all in person or all on screen.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and think in terms of that question as well, it's the nuances. I think you have to experiment and learn. I don't think there's a right or wrong way to do this just yet. I haven't seen anyone do this effectively well. Those kind of individual nuances, the eye contact that people will see with each other. Yeah. So in terms of decision making as a group, it can be not evenly distributed in terms of contributions or thoughts or ideas in those two different spaces. So I wouldn't say not to do it. I think Perry is either, but from my perspective, around actually being really open and curious about saying, we've made that decision. Did we involve everyone? Did you feel involved in it? Did we do that in the right way for us as an organisation, and learn from that rather than just assuming that you can do it? Because I think it's an incredibly complex thing to do.
Brilliant, thank you.
Thanks for those questions, and as they're coming through, pop through, and we'll have some time at the end of this for some more questions, because we're really interested in tailoring the content for yourselves as best as we can. So thanks, Perry, for everything you've said there. And I'm going to try and build on this a little bit to share some ideas about actually how can you start to have some of the conversations that Perry mentioned about actually learning about individual preferences, but preferences of the teams. So I'm encouraging you to take more of an individual perspective now for the concept that I'm going to share with you in job crafting. But I like Perry's idea of a patchwork approach. We're not saying that everyone gets to cherry pick an individual solution for themselves. That's not going to be feasible or optimal or even possible for everyone. But I think what the best organisations who are navigating this are making decisions on the knowledge of what individual preferences are. So rather than making these decisions blind and saying we're going to make these decisions on behalf of everyone, or team leaders doing it on behalf of their teams, they're understanding what people's preferences are and then trying to find optimum solutions to that, and recognizing there's always going to be some element of compromise when you're doing that, and learning as well in terms of the situations, because obviously again we're in a new space with this liminal position, and the decisions that people make now, the preferences people state now, may not be the ones that they actually like in reality. So people might enjoy being in those metal tubes that Perry mentioned more than they thought they would do, or vice versa. Who knows? We don't know. But I think it's difficult for people to say this is my preference for the future in a static and stuck way without really having lived and breathed that. So that's again an idea that I want to kind of share with everyone listening to this at the moment. Is just, you've got to think about this as an experimental phase in terms of your organisation, your team, and you as an individual, in terms of how you're going to operate in this new space. So this is a quote that some of you may recognise. Maybe on the chat, if someone could put something in there in terms of actually saying, do you know who said this? Any colour as long as it's black. Just wonder if anyone can put that in the chat. I'll just see who comes the fastest fingers first here from spotting. Just see coming through. Or Andrea, maybe you can forward. So yeah, Sean and Chris. Yeah. So Henry Ford was the person who said this. And I think the temptation, so Henry Ford, when he was interviewed, and I read this as part of the research for my book in terms of his autobiography, was saying that he was being surveyed by members of his marketing team and the engineering team, saying we need to offer different colours for the car, and Henry Ford was saying no, absolutely not. We're not going to pander to the special, in his quote, with a special 15 or 20% of people who might want their car in a different colour. It's going to cost more money for us. It's going to be inefficient. So we're going to make this decision on behalf of everyone, and this is what we're going to do. And you can't argue with Henry Ford's thinking, in terms of the fact it was one of the most successful motor cars ever launched, and as Ford carries on to kind of the success, you can't argue the fact that there was some benefit in the decision that he made. But as the world has changed around us, if we look at kind of auto manufacturing now and how we can buy our products and services, we can buy our car, change pretty much any and every aspect of the cars that we buy, from the colors to the engine size to the seat coverings to minis. You can even change the display that it projects when you open and close your door on the side of the street. It's in everything, and and the manufacturers allow us to do this because they recognize as individuals we like having our services built around us. Yet we don't often necessarily apply this to the workplace, so we don't necessarily encourage discussion about actually what is it we as employees want, how can we perform at our best. And this is critical when we're thinking about this hybrid circumstances, the fact that actually rather than making decisions on behalf of everyone else, rather than having this Henry Ford mentality, which is tempting because it makes it clear for everyone what's happening, you're providing clarity, we need to actually really take the temperature to understand what the needs and the wants and the desires are of the people working for the organization. So my view in terms of when it comes to hybrid would be that you shouldn't be placing big bets. You should be actually going big bang. You should be doing this in an experimental way with the full engagement of your colleagues. And I'll explain kind of an additional benefit to that engagement in a second. So again, what we tend to do organizationally sometimes is we place people in kind of boxes. So we design roles for people. We have very clear tasks and activities, and we kind of put them in this. So we, as managers, as leaders, we can create these roles again for maybe with the best of intentions to give people clarity in terms of what they're doing. But a consequence of that is that people can feel that they're being starved of their personality, the opportunity to flex and innovate and iterate their roles and to bring their own life experiences to bear within the work that they do. So I think sometimes within the workplace we have not just glass ceilings that we hear about, but actually glass walls as well, and the fact that actually it's difficult to break out and do things differently. So from my perspective, kind of with all deference to kind of Henry Ford's thinking, I think our work should come in any and every different colour. And I think this is particularly critical in this liminal space that Perry talks about now when it comes to designing and thinking about new ways of working. So why do we need to kind of take more consideration of the personal preferences of individuals? I'm just going to share with you two kind of studies, and again there's lots of research and resources at the end of these slide packs that you'll get that you can follow up on these. The first is a study by Mike Norton and colleagues at Harvard Business School, and of course you would have always think about going to IKEA in these sessions, and they ran a study where they split participants into two different groups. The first group they asked to come into the laboratory or the space and build the stationary boxes that you see in front of you. So they spent 10 to 15 minutes kind of building these. You might have done this yourself at some point. And then they asked them to say, what's the value worth of these products? The second group of participants, which we call the inspectors, they were asked to just come in and the boxes will be made for them. So they just got to inspect the boxes and just kind of see how much they like them. And then they were saying, can you think how much these are worth? So place of value bid on these items. And there was a significant difference between the builders and the inspectors. So one group valued them significantly more than the others. And I just get people to guess, again on the chat, just put a B or an I if you think it was the builders or the inspectors that valued the products the most.
Well, got B's coming through.
Got B's coming through. Yeah.
B's,
so yeah, all B. So you get it. Or a couple of I's. So I think I is a logical answer here. So I is a logical one because they haven't had to do any work in terms of building the box. It's kind of there for them. And yeah, actually, you have to imbue some work by building the box. Yet the people who built the boxes valued the item twice as much as those that have been given it. And we might recognise this in our house, things that we've built, and the colours of the walls or kind of DIY projects that we've done that aren't really maybe that good from a professional eye, but we actually really, really value them. In the workplace, again, in HR, and I've done this myself, we sometimes make decisions on behalf of other people when it comes to change or policies or something, because we think it's easier for people and clearer for people to do this. Yet the cost of that is that people may not value and buy into them as much as they could do if they contributed to them in some way. And again, when it comes to hybrid, we really need to be thinking about this building phase. Second study, just to briefly mention, relates to was a joint study by Vienna Business School and Miami Business School, and they asked participants to design a pen. And the pen was going to be used to giving out at conferences to advertise the university. So the pen was exactly the same, but the participants came in and designed the logo and the colour of the pen that they thought would be the best looking to give out to people at these kind of conferences. They asked the participants to come back a week later, and one group were given the pen that they designed. The other group was given the kind of pen that had been designed by someone else. So the actual manufacture of the pen was exactly the same. But what they asked the participants to do is saying, can you test out the pen on using these on the papers in front of you? And the papers had some puzzles on them, some anagram tests and some other things. And the researchers were actually secretly kind of timing how long people took to kind of play on these tasks that they've been given in front of them to test the pen out, and how accurate they were. And the people who are using their personalised pens, and the pens that they had designed themselves, were not only spent more time playing with them, doodling with them, and doing the puzzles, but they were also more accurate on the puzzles too. So they had this kind of using personalised pen gave them a performance advantage, and this performance advantage again applies to the workplace. So when we personalise our work, or feel that we're personalising our work, being involved in decisions, that we perform better. Yet again, we don't often actively encourage or invite people to personalise the work that they're doing. And this is something that I've been really kind of curious about, and something that I've spent my time focusing on and researching since I've came across this. So a takeaway for me when it comes to personalization, and this again comes to hybrid, is that people may like the things they're given. So you might build a solution for people. Some people might like it, some won't. They will tend to value it more if they feel that they have been involved in building it. And if they can create it with the team or by themselves, then they'll tend to love it. So they will kind of have really, really value it. And again, I'm not saying that you should allow everyone to design their own personalized working practices. That's not necessarily achievable. But if you involve people in those decisions, understand what their preferences are, and they can see and value the fact that you've listened to them, then the chances are the outcome will be more kind of beneficial and palatable to them. So how can we bring this personal touch to the workplace? Well, you can do this through this concept called job crafting. So job crafting is something that was first written about in 2001, and there's been over 140 peer-reviewed papers written about this, kind of really kind of carefully constructed academic kind of papers, which are much more of the magnitude than ideas such as growth mindset, such as psychological safety that we all hear about as HR leaders and professionals. Yet many of us haven't heard about this notion of job crafting, but actually the research evidence behind it is probably bigger than either of those two concepts. And job crafting is actually inviting and encouraging people to personalize their approach to work. So rather than saying you do this work in one way, fixed way, actually what it's saying is, what are the ways that you personally can bring your strengths, your passions, your interests to what you're doing. It's not about redesigning a job from scratch. It's about making small iterative changes to shaping the job that you already have. So a way of thinking about job crafting is thinking about like a semi-tailored suit or a dress that you might have had. So with a semi-tailored suit or dress, the basic design and the fabric of the outfit is fixed. You can't change it. So like a job, the fundamental responsibilities and tasks of that job are fixed. But what you can do with a semi-tailored piece of clothing is to personalize the dimensions to make it a better, more comfortable fit. You're changing maybe 2% of the overall garment. Similarly, when it comes to job crafting, you're not changing the footprint of the job overall, but what you are doing is encouraging people to think about how they can make it a better, more comfortable, better looking and better performing fit for them as individuals. And this is a quote based on a colleague at Virgin Money. We're doing some work together as a pilot group for job crafting. They subsequently went on to kind of roll out, and they were interested as an organisation about saying, would this resonate within this context? And this is applied to universities and it applied to the civil service in some areas as well. But one of the feedback that we got from the participants was saying that what this is doing, job crafting encourages me to do is to recognise that I'm being seen by managers, by the organisation, not as just a number, not as a cog in the machine, but as actually a living, breathing human being, and who knew that people actually want that recognition, to be seen and heard as individuals. And again, I don't think it's deliberate, but we don't often invite conversations with people, active conversations about how they are working, how they could make their work better, and how they could shape and design their tasks and activities and their relationships in ways that work for them, but work for their colleagues and work for the organisation. So these are the types of conversations that are critical, I'd say, in the current liminal space, to come back to that word. So for those who want to deep dive into this, I've written a book. So this book was in, as an HR professional, I was trying to think about how I could pull together all the research, all this, because there's hundreds of papers in a practical way that people can apply and use these ideas and concepts. And so just as a mini kind of, I suppose it is a plug for the book, but saying if you're interested in this concept, then that's my best possible kind of offering in terms of making these ideas accessible. But I'm going to share with you the kind of cliff notes now, just so you don't need to kind of buy the book if you don't want to kind of explore the idea. So the first concept, the first time this was written about in terms of job crafting was in 2001 by two researchers, Amy Wisniewski and Jane Dutton, and they were studying engagement. And what they found was that the people who tended to be more engaged with their work actually in some ways came to customize their jobs in some way. And the most famous study that they wrote about was around hospital cleaners. So they interviewed the hospital cleaners, and they found that cleaners who were doing ostensibly the same job, some of them were very engaged, some of them weren't very engaged. The people who were more engaged were the ones that actually saw their job as having a higher purpose and meaning. And they also tended to shape tiny bits of their job to reflect that. So some of the cleaners who were more engaged with the work, they would they would find ways to make eye contact with patients during the day to kind of give them a smile. They might look out for family members who looked lost in the corridors and point them to where they should go. One cleaner went as far as kind of moving the pictures around in the corridors to make the environment more stimulating. These are all small things that take maybe 5 minutes a day for them, but there were things that reflected how they saw the job and how they, as individuals, wanted to be as a human. So they wanted to be someone of help and of service to other people. Other people within the hospital cleaners, when they interviewed them, the cleaners were saying, actually, I just see my job as very low status. They felt they had no opportunity or discretion to bring themselves to the work that they did. So this wasn't being forced upon someone, but it was some individuals themselves were finding ways to customize and personalize their work. And the researchers called this job crafting. And job crafting has since been applied in pretty much any and every industry sector today. And from an HR perspective, it can really support a number of agendas that you're having. I see it as a mechanism, as a vessel for engagement and performance within individuals. So it can support well-being, and obviously it's critical in this Mental Health Awareness Week to kind of be aware of this. It's maybe not fruit and fitness that you would often kind of expect when you think about well-being, but actually having a sense of control and purpose in the work that you're doing is fundamental to people feeling healthy and happy in the work that they do. The absence of this, an absence of control, an absence of people kind of recognizing you as an individual is one of the biggest predictors of kind of stress and anxiety in the work that we do. It's obviously critical to flexible working. Hybrid is what we're talking about, linked to performance and diversity inclusion, because it's celebrating and recognizing people to personalize their work, to bring their own experiences, their backgrounds, their strengths to life. So rather than seeing our individuality as a threat or something that we want to kind of avoid, is something that actually we have to tolerate effectively differences amongst our colleagues. It's actually turning on its tail and saying, actually, we can thrive as an organization by enabling and encouraging people to tap into their diverse selves. It can help. It's linked really strongly to employee experience and to change and transformation as well, particularly from a bottom-up perspective. And again, this is why I think it's so critical in this hybrid kind of times or blended working time that we're in, to think about actually encouraging people to think about working and thinking about the work differently. There's a subtle difference between being proactive and job crafting. So some of you may say, I've been proactive, I shape my work anyway. And the difference being that the job crafting is being proactive with a bit of purpose. So if you think about two runners in the street, and you might see one person run past you and they might just be running because they enjoy running and they just go and get some exercise, and that's great and valid. They'll get all the benefits from that exercise. Yet someone else might run past the street and going exactly the same pace and almost look identical, but they may be training for a Couch to 5K or a half marathon, or with a specific goal in mind, such as weight loss or to to be fitter to spend more time with their grandkids. So they are kind of they're doing something with a specific purpose, and job crafting is being proactive in your work, but with purpose, with deliberation around tapping into the things that matter to people. And there's kind of common characteristics when it comes to job crafting. When you encourage people to craft their roles, it's very personal to the individuals. It has to come from within. It's experimental. So often with job crafting, it's not saying we know what the outcome of this is going to be. We're actually approaching this with an element of curiosity about saying what's going to happen. It tends to be small as well. So we're actually, again, a common concern amongst managers and leaders is that when people job craft, they expect people to be literally kind of setting fire to their role profiles or ripping up their job descriptions. And perhaps unexcitingly and disappointingly for some maybe who are looking forward to a spectacle or riots, doesn't happen. People actually, when they're given the opportunity, they act responsibly and they act with purpose. And they do it proactively in a way that I think a lot of people were concerned about people from working from home in terms of the loss of productivity or the loss of more problems within the organizational sector. And most organizations that I've worked with haven't seen this. In fact, they've seen an uplift of individuals benefiting the trust that they've been shown by the organization. And lastly, people have unexpected outcomes. So again, we're looking at hybrid working and working differently. So recently, an example of someone who went through a crafting workshop was saying one of the things that they wanted to do was to create more activity in their day because they was quite sedentary. So they were looking for an opportunity to get outside. They used to do walking meetings with their colleagues around the office building, but they couldn't have the opportunity to do this. So what they decided to do was put on their headphones and phone up their colleague. The colleague put their headphones on or the earbuds, and they both went for a walk virtually, kind of around their streets or to the park, and they had their conversation. So the reason they were doing that was for exercise, or for that person suggested it. But the unexpected outcome was that they found they had more open conversations. They had more less guarded conversations. They were more creative in terms of what they were doing. So again, doing things differently might lead to unexpected outcomes. And again, from a hybrid working perspective, working in the office in kind of sprints in 2 days, kind of just 2 days rather than 5 days, it may be that, again, you'll find that people have more energy and enthusiasm to kind of engage and connect with their colleagues, and they might enjoy that more than they would necessarily expecting. You just don't know. This is a model of job crafting in terms of the why, the what, and the how. And the center part of this is the why. Why does job crafting matter? Why should we care about it? And there's three kind of key elements that I think HR leaders and anyone on this call should be aware of. So first is that it's related to well-being and thriving, health and happiness as well, in terms of those measurements when they've measured them. People who job craft tend to be healthier in their job and buffer stress and anxiety as well. It's linked to performance, so in terms of actually individuals' ratings of their self-performance, but also their team leaders' rating of an individual's performance, and also, interestingly, customers' satisfaction. There's been a number of studies that have shown there's a correlation between people providing good service to other people and those individuals feeling that they can craft and customize their jobs in some way. And then lastly, it's linked to growth. So in terms of career growth and satisfaction, people who craft their jobs tend to report greater satisfaction and progression within the work that they do. So how do you do it? So in terms of, what does it look like? People tend to craft in 5 ways. They change their tasks. They might change their skills. So in terms of develop their skills or focus their skills in particular areas, they connect with the purpose and meaning of what they do. They look at how they connect with other people. So they might boost their relationships with people. They might reduce their relationships, interactions with people that they feel are particularly maybe toxic or negative impacts on them within the workplace. Or they might reframe how they might work hard to kind of develop their relationships further if they find them particularly challenging. And then there's wellbeing crafting. So this is around how we can make our work healthier from a mental and physical perspective. And then the outer circle is the how. So how can we do this? And it's by asking questions about who do we interact with, what do we do it, when do we do it, and why. And I'll just kind of share with this again with some of the slides in terms of from a hybrid perspective. I think the when and the where are particularly critical. So one of the things you could be doing now as team leaders, and you might have already been doing this, but actually encouraging people to think about questions in terms of the when. So when do you feel most refreshed during the week? When do you get your best ideas? If you could create the during working hours for yourself, what would that be? And other certain times that it would be easier for you to work. getting this information will enable you to make the best decisions in terms of developing those alpha and beta kind of teaming structures that Perry meant and referred to. And similarly, when it comes to the where, it's around thinking about where do you do your best thinking, where do you feel most energized. And again, one of the things that I find time and again working with people, and you might have found this yourself listening to this, is that people don't always necessarily have their best ideas in the office. Or even the best ideas sat behind their computer screen at home. It's in those different spaces that people find that they think differently. And again, the best organizations are the ones who are going to kind of recognize that and enable people to lean into it rather than take them away from people. And just to say that if people are interested in this further, as I'm coming to the end of this, there's a job crafting guide that we've put together and just recently launched. It's free and you can access it to get some further information on job crafting. And I was really privileged to do a TED talk that's just gone live again 2 weeks ago now, that you can find on with a quick Google search if you're interested in a 10-minute précis of job crafting to explore it further and share with other people. So thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Rob. That was fantastic. And Perry, thank you very much for answering most of those questions as you were going along. I'm so impressed with how quick you typed. No, that was fantastic. And obviously, we want as many questions as possible. I know there's quite a lot in the box there. I'm quite mindful that there's quite a few people who are logged in who can't actually access the chat box as well. So Perry, I know that you've answered a few, so I'm just going to shoot some questions that you may have already answered, if that's okay. So a lady named Amanda, will those people who can't get into the office often get overlooked by promotions and opportunities as they aren't as visible as people who can get into the office?
Yeah, so if I start, I reckon there's a good Rob sort of conclusion to this. I think we have based a lot of promotability around presenteeism and about how people are showing up and almost engineering their way into thinking of leaders who think, oh, they're good because I see them and I hear them and I understand what they do. And then these quiet, reflective but very powerfully working individuals get overlooked. So I think it's wrong now. So I think in the remote and the present sense, I think we've got to recalibrate what we mean by promotability, right? And I think it comes to the first part, I think, is people's intent. And I think this is where it works brilliantly with Jobcraft and Rob's approach, right? If you intend to progress your career laterally or upwardly, I think you should have the tools at your disposal to plot that and work that out with your leaders and with your colleagues. And I don't think that matters whether you're remote or not. So Rob, I think we've got to put the emphasis not on 9-box grids and on people nodding people through, but on merit. What do you reckon?
I completely agree. Merit is the way forward. I think the thing that we get for learning in the fact that we know from research that people have been overlooked, and a cost of people working remotely has been that they have been overlooked in terms of promotion. There's a couple of studies that show they're not great. One has been in China and Asia, and there's one in America. There's not loads, but there's some evidence there. So I think what we can do now is actually work with that knowledge. So in terms of the question, the fact you're posing the question means that actually you can be critical in your organization or about saying, how are we interacting with, are we treating people fairly and evenly based on their work and circumstances? So I would like to see, in terms of if you're going through a promotion committee, a factor of people's working environments should be noted, not to kind of make as part of the decision making, but to make sure that you might not find there's any bias or any trends that you're seeing in terms of the data. So I think this is a case of saying there's a potential, but I think we can, with care, you can and consideration, you can avoid it.
I think we have to be mindful as well that research has shown us that women, people of colour and people with disabilities have suffered disproportionately more about career prospects and job opportunities during the pandemic. So I think we've got to start addressing some of those concerns as well, so that it feels really equalised. That's the challenge we have.
Brilliant, thank you. Another question, do you think that decisions made regarding future working arrangements will lead to a rush for applications for jobs and roles which support more home-based working or more flexible offers?
Again, if you want, Rob, I'll start and you can come in on this one.
Sure.
So my sense is that those people who have been very stoic about declarations of returning to what was will suddenly find that actually the receptiveness to that is not quite as enthusiastic as they believe it will be. So it'll be somewhere in the midst of that. And I think when we see people offering flexible working and there is more of an interest in that from the job market, they'll naturally have to recalibrate. So I think it's madness to not offer flexible, almost like as a default, because I think it biases towards people who can fill certain roles on a full-time basis and travel anywhere and so on. It's just not that simple anymore. So I think it'll be a gradual creep, but I think we'll see it quieten. What do you reckon, Rob?
I think I'd probably just say I agree. I think in terms of that perspective, so there's not much to add. Again, other than making assumptions, again, I think we just need to be careful. Again, saying do we think this is what's going to happen or not? And I think no one quite knows. There's going to be such a difference between working remotely during a pandemic versus working virtually with the kind of the ability to optimize it for your own working circumstances. And I don't think we've tapped into that at all. We haven't seen the potential of that actually exploited in a wide scale across organizations and across sectors. We have seen it in niche, smaller industry kind of organizations, but we just haven't seen people doing this deliberately with purpose and with thought and effort.
Totally that.
Brilliant. I'm loving all these comments that are coming through. My eyes keep just glancing over and just reading through them. So another question here, if you don't mind. Where am I? What are your thoughts about the best laid plans of life plans changing? Children being sick, mental health kicking in when someone doesn't feel like coming into a physical or virtual meeting, and that impacting on the team time, even if Fridays are always our office time.
Yeah, I'm going to weave in the comment from Kay at Leeds Teaching Hospital, obviously connected to Dean Royals, who's a good friend of mine, about ward housekeepers and porters can't work from home. I think we've got to reconstruct that sense of connection to people who have no choice and people who do, as a starting point. And the way to do that is stop thinking about the funnels that they operate in and start thinking about the more horizontal nature of where their work connects with other teams. So I've seen some phenomenal examples in the dairy industry and in printing, where instead of having marketing, sales, production, whatever, they've worked across those disciplines and formed little teams or houses who then have client bases and commonality of understanding, and they kind of work together across rather than down. That's one way, I think, of connecting people more rather than this disparate divisional way that we work. So I think we start from that premise. And then the other thing I'll come into, again, it builds on Rob's work on job crafting, is the kind of next level up is team agreements. If you as a team say, look, here's our normal principles that we all want to behave like with each other and support and look after each other, and here's how we'll deal with exceptions, like if somebody does have a sick child or whatever it might be. I think you craft it at team level because it works brilliantly then with Rob's individual craft. So I think team agreements are my way forward for this. Why have just individual and then organizational objectives? You need this bit in the middle that connects people.
And I think just to add to that, I think that's all great. And team crafting has worked really, really well and have these kind of conversations, and sometimes referred to again social contracts in terms of saying what are our group norms and expectations of each other. They're really powerful. I think in terms of fairness, and fairness has come up a lot within this chat as well. And recognizing that some people may not be able to work from home. I recognize that. But what you can do is have a set of guiding principles, which again, from my perspective, is around actually inviting and encouraging everyone to think about actually how they do their work and whether they do it as well as they can do, and the opportunity to improve their jobs. That's a principle that everyone can do. And then taking that to the next level, it's around actually what are the opportunities people have to kind of personalize aspects of their tasks. Now, for some people, that will be more limited than others in terms of maybe the task that they do specifically. But I've seen, say, job crafting work with laboratory technicians within porters within hospitals. I've seen it work within contact centers, places where I would expect that you couldn't allow people to personalize their roles. They're the ones that are starved of this and actually get better, more creative than maybe some of the people that have got much more autonomy. So I think there is, as a principle in terms of fairness, we can approach opportunities for people saying, let's give everyone the opportunity to reflect on how they do their work. And see what they can do it better. I think that's a common theme. And we talked about better at the start of this session. I think it's like, how can we do this better? And this is just an ideal opportunity for us to break down some of those past practices.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I think we've all redefined who the heroes are in work, and I think this is a chance to keep them in that space, right? Don't think we're all back to normal now, so you just carry on doing your cleaning and portering. They've been the heroes keeping the thing going, so let's keep that in mind.
Brilliant. One or two more questions. So what are your thoughts on taking travel into account when designing a return to work schedule and frequency?
Great point. I saw an article in some Boston newspaper lamenting the amount of time we now don't have to wander in our minds aimlessly on our commutes. Now, I don't know about you, but I found it very difficult to wander aimlessly on a commute with a packed train and lots of sweaty bodies and all that. So I could wander aimlessly just by sat in my own room looking out the window, or as Rob says, doing some walking meetings. So let's not glorify commuting as the place where you do your thinking, but it is, if it's an essential part of your job, it absolutely needs to feature into it that you've got that travel to and from proximity. So at team agreement level and at job level, like Rob's been talking about, it needs to feature in it. It's not something you fit in. It's something that's part of how you get to where you need to get to do the work you need to do with the people you do. So I think we think about it differently. We've just ignored it, I think, up to now. That's not fair.
Yeah, and I think also the turning that on his head slightly is in terms of having minimal expectations and standards, to saying, actually, are there core hours that in terms of working office that you expect people to be there? And if it's 2 days a week, actually some people are saying, actually, I can live hundreds of miles away from this, and I would actually, my choice would be to come in and stay overnight, and so take a train up early morning, stay overnight, and I can live in a completely different part of the country that suits my circumstances, my personal circumstances. But in order to make that decision, you need the clarity of what the expectations are from your employer to be able to do that. So I would say that in terms of whether the employer should take this into account, I think actually the work should be the thing that you should take into account, and then saying the delivery of that should actually come down to what the individuals will want to do.
Great. Fantastic, thank you. And I guess we can have one more question. Will teams agreements require external facilitators to ensure managers don't dominate discussions and engineer what they want at the expense of the staff that they manage?
So as external facilitators, we have to say yes, obligatory provide, say yes. And I know at least one person who's really good at this on this call, and it's not me. But in all seriousness, I think that actually understanding the skill sets of people to lead these conversations is something that actually the HR team should be focused on. A leader listening to this, you should be checking in with saying, actually, can my colleagues be comfortable and confident having these types of conversations with us? And if not, then this is such an important time for us as an organisation to get right. And the cost of getting it wrong is so significant that you need to think about that skill set. So I'm not saying absolutely you should get other people in to do it, but you should be critical about, have you got the skill sets within your team already to do this?
Spot on, Rob. I think you've already got that in your organisation. Often HR can act as the independent broker and just say, come in and help us get this right. Or it's actually a good way to build across other teams and just say, look, you do similar work to us, you understand us, we want to craft this so that we're not biased. So we're going to equalise who we are in this decision making. We want you to hold the space for us. It's a lovely way of building some cross connections. But I agree, the impartiality, I think, as Rob says, casts a very different light on the decisions that are made. Managers can be dominant in this, but managers can also get a little bit carried away trying to please everybody. Well, let's work on how we collectively set the agreements and work with the exceptions. Brilliant.
Thank you so much. We've had some fantastic questions come through, and there's quite a lot in there that we've not managed to answer, but really? I'm guessing, Rob and Perry, you've got access to the chat box, so please feel free to go through all of those. And anyone who does have any more questions, please feel free to get in touch with myself, Rob, or Perry. I'll put my email address in the chat box now. And I know it's a lot of information to take in. Sometimes people do come back with questions later on. So if you do have questions, please feel free to pick them up. I'm just putting my email address in there now. And I'm sure Rob and Perry would be more than happy to receive you. I just want to say a massive, huge thank you, Rob and Perry, for your time. This has been a well worth hour. Read through some of the comments in there. I'm sure you'll agree, everyone, that it's been fantastic having you both on board to deliver such an engaging presentation. Just to our participants, thank you so much for your questions, your comments, your experiences and so on. And if you do want to find out more about the webinars we run, please do visit www.civilservicecollege.org.uk. And of course, one big final thank you for Rob and Perry for your time. It's been lovely having you here.
Been brilliant. Thank you. Loved it. Great audience.
Thank you so much, everybody. And take care. And we'll catch you soon. Thank you.